Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a major, a really defining shift in the world of fantasy and sci-fi content creation.
Yeah, it's a big one.
For nearly a decade, one name, Daniel Greene, has been pretty much synonymous with genre news on YouTube. He's acted as, crucial central fixture for the community.
Absolutely, sort of the go-to place.
And now he is stepping away from the weekly commitment that really made him a household name among readers, his long-running fantasy news segment.
That's right. And our mission today really is to analyze this event not as just, simple YouTube drama, but more as a case study.
Right.
We need to move past the immediate headlines and try to understand the complex confluence of factors at play here. Things like the intense pressure of the creator economy, the toll on personal health, and, the explosive consequences when that public persona meets private controversy.
It really shines a light on the maybe unsustainable environment facing these high-profile niche content. Exactly. This creator, he commands an audience of nearly 500,000 subscribers. That's huge. And he officially announced that he would be gradually transitioning out as the regular host of this massive weekly segment. It's a huge moment for BookTube, bro.
And crucially, this announcement wasn't entirely out of the blue, was it?
No, not completely.
Over the previous year, a period heavily marked by, let's say, professional stress and some deeply personal controversy, he had actually discussed stepping away multiple times. He'd sort of floated the idea before.
I remember that.
So the core tension for you, the listener, lies in what this transition reveals about the whole ecosystem. It's about the demands of running high-frequency, niche journalistic content on a platform, YouTube, that, let's face it, fundamentally rewards rapid, often high-energy output over, say, deep, sustained investment.
It really is the ultimate challenge, isn't it? Trying to be a serious news aggregator, maybe even an investigative journalist sometimes, while simultaneously operating within those intense, often theatrical parameters that YouTube algorithms seem to demand.
Exactly. Performance versus substance.
So before we get to the breaking point, maybe we should establish the baseline first. Just how important was fantasy news to the community?
Oh, it had truly solidified itself as a cornerstone. This was far more than just another channel. It was, for many, the weekly essential broadcast for anyone serious about fantasy literature.
Like appointment viewing.
Pretty much, yeah. Every week, viewers knew they would get comprehensive updates on publishing news, new book releases, major author announcements, and all the essential industry development. It provided that regular, reliable pulse check that, frankly, the community often lacked elsewhere in such a consolidated format.
And I think what elevates this beyond just, a content creator changing their schedule is the impact. It went far beyond mere aggregation, didn't it?
Absolutely.
We aren't talking about just skimming Reddit and reading press releases out loud. The show developed a reputation for, genuinely investigative work at times.
And what's fascinating here is that the show was willing to wade into some pretty complex, even adversarial waters, topics that often put it directly at odds with major industry players.
Mm-hmm.
The most powerful example cited in our material, and one he often returned to, is his detailed, persistent coverage of Amazon's business practices, particularly concerning Audible's exclusive contracts.
Okay, let's pause on that for a second, because this is where the deep dive has to get a bit technical. When we talk about Audible's exclusive contracts, we're talking about serious, real-world industry critique that affects countless careers. Why exactly were these exclusive contracts such a hot-button issue, and what was Greene's investigative show actually doing about it?
Well, these contracts are controversial primarily because they essentially lock authors into exclusivity with Amazon's ecosystem for their audiobook distribution.
Okay.
They often offer higher royalty rates, sure, but only if the author forgoes all other markets. No other platforms, no library sales, nothing.
Wow. Okay, so it's a walled garden.
Exactly. And this has massive implications for authors. It limits their reach and the diversity of their income stream. For consumers, it tends to create market monopolies, stifling competition, and it makes it harder for independent booksellers and, crucially, library to carry digital audio.
So Greene wasn't just talking about which author got a movie deal announced this week. He was actually digging into and exposing potentially anti-competitive practices that were actively shaping the digital literature economy.
Precisely. That moved his coverage into a whole different tier of reporting, didn't it?
It really did.
His work provided valuable transparency on issues affecting readers, authors, and especially those independent booksellers who really struggle against Amazon's colossal market power. That is big stuff that genuinely impacts market dialogue and awareness.
Yeah, you don't often see that level of sustained critique on a platform like YouTube, especially within a niche like fantasy book.
No, you don't. And if we connect this to the broader media landscape, it really showcases how a large independent booktube channel can, theoretically, step in and provide a crucial journalistic voice. You know, traditional media often ignores these niche economic issues until they maybe reach a crisis point.
Or they just don't have the specific expertise.
Right. But Greene's segment was there week after week, providing consistent, detailed pressure and information on these things.
But here's the tension again, right? In order to deliver this critical, potentially dry, investigative content, you still have to package it in a way that the YouTube algorithm rewards.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to his famous on-screen persona. He actually referred to himself as the regular disheveled goblin host.
Yes, and the analysis we reviewed spent considerable time on this It described the on-screen style as acting all crazy and cringy, you know, a high-energy performance art that, while clearly popular with his large audience, seemed to create a kind of dissonance, serious topics discussed sometimes.
Yeah, the source mentioned one reviewer even noted their own child labeled it corny YouTube or corny performance art.
Right.
That detail is really telling, I think, because it forces us to ask, why is this high-energy, almost theatrical delivery often seen as a necessary prerequisite for platform success? You have this serious reporter figure discussing market manipulation by a giant corporation like Amazon, but he feels the need, or the platform incentivizes him, to deliver the news wrapped in this intense goblin host package just to capture algorithm time and viewer attention.
That's the constant systemic struggle for many creators, isn't it? If the platform optimizes for intense personality and, importantly, frequent uploads demanding a level of charisma that sometimes borders on performance art, then even essential investigative content might have to adopt that presentation style just to survive the noise.
And that sustained theatrical demand. Well, it must be utterly exhausting for the creator over years.
Oh, undoubtedly. It means you're not just a reporter, you're an actor, you're a producer, an editor, a scriptwriter, all simultaneously, week in, week out.
That exhaustion is the key link. It bridges the demands of the performance directly to the physical toll he cited as the primary official reason for stepping away.
Yes, let's unpack that unsustainable cycle. Greene was remarkably transparent, actually, about the core mechanism forcing his departure, the overwhelming workload imposed specifically by that weekly news cycle deadline.
He was quoted directly on the matter, identifying the problem as, and I quote, having an entire episode for fantasy news in one day. That was the crux.
Yeah.
And while he stressed he tried every method to spread out the work, researching earlier in the week, preparing scripts ahead of time, the real-time nature of news releases fundamentally defeated those attempts. Things always broke late.
The preparation reality sounds brutal, honestly. News often breaks or confirms late in the cycle, Monday usually, forcing him into these massive editing and research sessions that frequently lasted until 3 or 4 a.m. on Monday night, leading into Tuesday morning. This isn't flexible work you can just shift around easily. It's an unforgiving, externally imposed deadline tied directly to industry press cycles and wanting to be current.
And the late finish, that 4 a.m. grind, was only the first half of the problem.
Exactly. He then had to be up again just a few hours later at 9 a.m. to actually release the finished segment. Why? To catch the daily algorithm cycle, get those initial...
So it wasn't just about having a bad night's sleep once a week. This work schedule, as he described it, was confirmed to be fundamentally breaking his circadian rhythm. It was messing up his sleep for the entire subsequent week, impacting his health overall.
And that detail about the medical confirmation is absolutely critical here. He stated explicitly that his doctor informed him that this high-stress, sleep-depriving schedule was, quote, not sustainable. This moved the conversation from simply acknowledging creator burnout, which we hear a lot about, to recognizing a necessary health-driven intervention. The physical limits of the human body simply do not conform to the relentless demands of the weekly YouTube news algorithm, especially when the content requires serious investigative depth and last-minute.
And this brings us right back to the systemic issue we mentioned earlier. Couldn't just say scale back to monthly investigative pieces earlier on, even if you wanted to, because the YouTube ecosystem prioritizes frequency.
Precise. Missing a weekly deadline or even just shifting to month impacts visibility, viewership, monetization. He was effectively trapped, in a way, by the very success metrics of the platform itself.
The algorithm demanded sacrifice.
You could put it that way. If he had shifted to maybe a monthly deep dive format a year or two ago, the channel's momentum would have likely stalled because the algorithm would have penalized that drop in frequency. The weekly news was the engine, the core driver of growth and visibility. But ultimately, the engine was destroying the driver.
So if the engine is being shut down, or at least throttled way back. What does the future look like for his content? He did confirm he is not quitting content creation entirely, but radically changing the format.
Yeah, he made that clear. He plans to continue creating other videos, but the focus will pivot towards more scheduled, controlled content. He explicitly mentioned doing those deep dives into specific topics, like the Audible issue he previously investigated, for example. Things that take time but aren't tied to a breaking news cycle. The specific fantasy news segment format, however, the weekly roundup, will be broken up, as he put it. It sounds like sporadic news updates might shift to shorter, less demanding formats, or maybe integrated into other videos. The big weekly push.
Now, I have to challenge this slightly, or maybe just probe. If he is pivoting to deep dives, doesn't serious investigation like digging into Amazon contracts or complex industry issues often require more intense research, even if it's less frequently scheduled? Is this truly a reduction in overall effort or just a shift in the type of pressure?
That's an excellent point, and it's nuanced. It's probably best understood as a shift in control, not necessarily a reduction in total intellectual effort or hours spent over, say, a month.
Okay, explain that.
Well, news dictates your schedule based on external press releases and breaking events happening now. You have to react. A deep dive, on the other hand, is a project you initiate. You research it, you schedule it, you record it largely on your timeline.
I see.
He controls the release date. He controls the length of the research phase. That shift from being constantly reactive to proactive creation fundamentally alters the stress profile, even if the final output for a deep dive is incredibly intellectually demanding and time-consuming in its own right.
That distinction between reactive and proactive pressure, that makes a lot of sense. That seems key to understanding the necessity of this pivot for his own well-being. However, we absolutely cannot discuss the departure without acknowledging the incredibly complex and, frankly, intense personal background that preceded this announcement.
Indeed. No, you can't separate it entirely. The announcement follows what was undoubtedly a very difficult period for him personally earlier in the year, defined by some very high-profile online controversy.
Right.
And we know that at the height of this drama, Greene had already publicly mused about stepping away from fantasy news. He'd mentioned potentially even handing the channel over to someone else entirely. So the idea wasn't brand new. It was just catalyzed, perhaps.
And the central component of that difficult period was the serious, high-stakes drama involving a fellow content creator, Naomi King. Her allegations drew massive public attention, didn't they?
They really did. The claims were profound. King accused Greene of sexual assault, alleging he coerced her into non-consensual sexual activity during a trip they took to Las Vegas. This immediately plunged Greene as a major creator into a massive public relations and personal crisis.
Huge allegation. However, as the situation progressed and played out very publicly, often through videos and social media posts from both sides, the narrative began to shift somewhat. The analysis we looked at indicates that as the story unfolded, it became, quote, very clear to some observers that King was potentially making up details or changing things in her account as time went on.
And Greene's primary method of defense in this very public arena was the production of receipts, as they're often called online, to counter her specific claims.
Right, receipts. For an audience interested in the mechanics of these online disputes, it's important to understand what those likely were in this context. In high-profile cases like this, receipts typically means things like time-stamped digital evidence, text message logs, emails, maybe flight booking detail, financial records, perhaps anything concrete that directly contradicted the accuser's stated timeline or specific claims about the interaction.
Exactly. Verifiable data.
So this wasn't just a straightforward he said, she said scenario playing out. It involved the public deployment of this kind of verifiable digital evidence aimed at refuting the core claim. And that, according to the source analysis, drastically altered many in the audience's perception of the situation over time.
But the personal cost, regardless of the outcome of the specific allegations, was already monumental, especially when Greene took the step of involving his spouse, bringing her onto his channel to address the fallout public.
Yeah, that was a moment. The analysis described that decision by some who reviewed the content as weird and cringy, perhaps understandable given the context, but it served a purpose for him. It confirmed serious personal admissions had to be made.
Right. On screen, Greene confirmed he had, in his words, obviously cheated on. So even setting aside the veracity of the very serious sexual assault allegation, which the source analysis ultimately concluded seemed like possibly an ugly clout grab or attention grab by someone who appeared to them to be struggling significantly, the underlying personal controversy regarding infidelity was tragically confirmed and made incredibly painfully public.
It's just an unbelievable amount of stress to process privately, let alone under the constant scrutiny of 500,000 followers and the wider internet, all while trying to maintain a demanding weekly journalistic endeavor.
Absolutely layered crisis.
So is it fair then to assume, or at least strongly speculate, that the sheer intensity of this negative scrutiny, which pulled his personal life and his marriage right into the harsh spotlight, may have been a major contributing factor, maybe even the final factor that broke his commitment to maintaining that highly visible weekly public segment.
I think that's a very reasonable speculation. It's hard to imagine it didn't play a significant role. The professional demands were already cited as unsustainable, sure, but the personal fallout from the controversy likely amplified the crisis tenfold. There is a strong possibility, as the source speculates, that his wife may have desired him to back away from the intense spotlight entirely. It's understandable. When your high E-fame brings such extreme negative allegations and personal exposure, even if the most serious allegations are ultimately refuted or widely disbelieved, the overall cost to your personal life, your health, your relationships can easily start to outweigh the professional benefits of hosting a popular news.
Yeah, the equation changes dramatically.
Completely.
The analysis also highlights something else, a very clear alternative priority that was kind of waiting in the wings for Greene all along, his own creative work.
Yes, that's a crucial piece of the puzzle. He is an author himself, he writes his own fantasy books, and he runs pretty significant crowdfunding campaigns, specifically using Kickstarter, to launch his own projects directly to his audience.
Right, he's had some big successes there.
He has, and this represents a classic shift we see in the creator economy, using a massive content platform like YouTube, not just for commentary or news aggregation, but strategic as a powerful launchpad for your primary creative product, in his case, his novel.
So stepping away from the demanding reactive news cycle frees up that critical time and, maybe more importantly, the mental energy needed for the deep focus required for writing, editing, book design, and managing the whole business aspect of his own book campaigns and Kickstarter.
Exactly. He is essentially pivoting from being primarily an aggressive content aggregator and news host to focusing more fully on being a primary creator and an effective mall publisher or businessman running his own idea.
It fundamentally changes his business model, doesn't it? He's transforming the channel, or at least its primary function, from being mainly a content stream that generates ad revenue and sponsorships around news into a massive built-in marketing machine for his own products, his books.
Precisely. And from his perspective, it's likely a far more sustainable and certainly more controllable model long-term. If the weekly news grind was deemed medically dangerous, moving to a model where he sells his own written work directly to his already established loyal audience path forward, maximize profit potential while minimizing those external deadlines and the reactive stress inherent in news coverage.
Makes perfect sense from a business and personal health. Okay, so the transition is underway. Fantasy news, or some version of it, is intended to continue. But the central personality, the goblin host, is leaving that regular role. Let's talk about the specific transition plan and what the broader implications might be for BookTube when the original defining host steps out of the spotlight like this.
Right. The transition plan involves introducing temporary and potentially permanent replacements. These are Austin and Rich from the YouTube channel to Ramble.
Okay, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're known in the community. They are apparently longtime college friends who initially started their channel with a focus on sharing book discussions, often delivered in a podcast style or through book club formats. They're established voices in the fantasy space already.
They sound like, capable, community-oriented successors, especially given their existing fantasy niche expertise. They aren't complete unknown. But this is where that inherent risk of personality-driven platforms comes into sharp relief, isn't it?
This is really the crux of the problem for the channel's future viewership, potentially. The analysis we looked at argues quite strongly that for most large BookTube channels, maybe most large YouTube channels, period, viewers are fundamentally personality-driven. They don't just subscribe to the concept of fantasy news in the abstract. They subscribe because they want to hang out with the personality, the specific person they have grown accustomed to, the goblin host, for better or for worse. His particular style, energy, and viewpoint is what drew them in and kept back.
Yeah, that rings true. And we have to consider whether Ramble's style, their approach, aligns with the kind of journalistic rigor that fantasy news had at times cultivated. Their existing formats suggest more of a focus on discussion, opinion, and community dialogue, which is absolutely valuable. Don't get me wrong, but can they, or will they even want to, carry the weight of doing that critical investigative work on topics like Audible contract?
Or will the channel naturally drift towards softer, more discussion-based content, which might be more in line with their established style?
Exactly.
That is the essential question, isn't it? If the new hosts are primarily focused on book club formats or reaction videos, the core identity of the channel, or at least that specific news set, risks shifting away from niche journalism towards more general community discussion.
And the risk then becomes that the original, perhaps highly specific audience that tuned in for that hard news, for those industry insights, may simply drift away if that's no longer the primary focus or delivered in the same.
So the speculation in the source material is therefore that replacing the established host with some random person, quote unquote, and I don't mean that disrespectfully towards Austin and Rich, just anyone other than Greene, regardless of that person's quality or knowledge, could cause a significant problem for the channel's stability.
Even if Austin and Rich are excellent hosts, maybe even better in some objective way, the emotional investment audiences had specifically in Daniel Greene, the personality, is arguably what drove that massive 500,000 subscription.
It creates what tech people might call a single point of failure, right? You build this massive monetizable audience largely through your unique presence, your personality. But when that personality leaves, the content itself, even if it remains professionally produced, well researched by successors, might lose its gravitational pull for a large chunk of that audience. The person is the brand. The channel's founder, the person whose analysis we reviewed, even noted that they believe their own channel would suffer significantly if they suddenly handed it over to someone else, underscoring that this is seen as a universal challenge across the platform for personality-led channels.
So, wrapping this section up, what does this all mean for you, the listener, maybe thinking about the life cycle and the sustainability of these large informational channels, especially on YouTube?
Well, this deep dive really serves as a stark kind of composite summary of the three fundamental pressures that content creators, especially successful ones, face today. It's a confluence.
Okay, what are they?
First, you often have to maintain a high-visibility personal brand, which frequently requires that intense, maybe even theatrical on-screen performance style to cut through the noise of the algorithm. Second, you must sustain rigorous, often incredibly time-consuming content production, usually on a relentless weekly schedule dictated not by creative flow, but by the platform's demand for consistency.
Right, the treadmill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, you have to somehow navigate and manage the inevitable and frequently ugly personal consequences of living public life. This includes potential health crises from the workload and relationship stress caused by the intense scrutiny and sometimes toxic online.
The story of Greene stepping down from the weekly grind is really a powerful illustration that even significant commercial success, having hundreds of thousands of subscribers, can't fully insulate you from the sheer physical and emotional demands of the platform and the lifestyle it requires.
No, it seems it can't. The channel itself may survive, it might even thrive in a new form with Austin and Rich, but the investigative fantasy news segment, as we knew it, the one built by Greene over nearly a decade, was ultimately rendered unsustainable for him personally by the very system and the pressures that propelled it to fame in the face.
So just to recap, the core drivers as we understood them from the analysis. They were distinct issues, but they seem to become mutually reinforcing, creating a perfect storm almost.
Yeah, I think that's fair. First, a confirmed health crisis flagged by a doctor, stemming directly from a fundamentally unsustainable work schedule dictated by the weekly news site. Second, the lingering, intense personal fallout from that high-profile controversy dragged his family life and marriage into the public eye in a very...
Okay.
And third, the strategic desire and perhaps the opportunity to pivot back towards his own personal writing projects and a more controllable, proactive content format centered on those deep dive videos in his successor. Less reactivity, more creative.
It really leaves us with a lingering question about the stability and future of niche journalism on these kinds of personality-driven platforms. Can the fantasy genre's coverage landscape maintain the critical, sometimes investigative edge that Greene occasionally provided? Or will the news coverage, now likely distributed across more channels or handled differently by the successors, naturally become softer, more focused on discussion and community rather than critique?
The successors, Austin and Rich, on Greene's channel will really be the proving ground for this theory in this case, won't they? It'll be fascinating to watch how they navigate that transition and what direction they segment, if they keep it in a similar form at all.
Yeah, will.
And that leads us, I think, to a provocative final thought for you, the listener, something that connects the dots back to the idea of a channel's potential.
Okay, let's hear it.
Given that Greene himself is pivoting partly towards doing more deep dive, potentially into important topics like Audible's practices, which he covered before, and acknowledging that the original weekly news format was deemed medically unsustainable for him, what unique responsibility, if any, does a high-profile, news-breaking booktuber have to their large audience when they decide, for entirely valid personal reasons, to step away from providing that critical weekly coverage?
That's interesting.
Did the platform's success, the fact that he became the source for so many, inadvertently create a vacuum of coverage when the creator was ultimately forced to prioritize their own self-preservation? Does the audience lose something vital that's hard to replace?
That is the big question, isn't it? About the reliance on individuals versus sustainable structures for niche information, especially on platforms like YouTube.
Yeah.
A lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.